My name is Jirō, and I am old now, my hands gnarled like temple cedar roots. I swept the floors at Honno-ji once, a boy in rough hemp robes who knew nothing of war or ambition. I was there the morning the Demon King died, when fire consumed the temple and the smell of burning flesh mixed with incense smoke. 40 years have passed, yet I still wake sometimes to the sound of musket fire cracking through dawn mist. I still see the orange glow reflected in rain puddles pooled between charred stones. They call it the incident at Honno-ji now, as if naming it makes it smaller, more manageable. But I was there. I saw Oda Nobunaga die, and I will tell you what I witnessed, though the truth is smoke and ash, as vanished as his body in those flames. I was 15 when Lord Nobunaga came to Honno-ji in the 5th month of Tensho 10. The rainy season had begun, clouds heavy and grey over Kyoto, drizzle pattering endlessly on temple roofs. I was a novice attendant in the Jodo Shinshu sect, orphaned young and given to the temple by an uncle who could not feed another mouth. My days were simple: sweep the halls before dawn prayers, tend the altar lamps. I prepared tea for visiting monks, scrub cooking pots until my knuckles bled. I knew the rhythm of temple bells, the scent of sandalwood burning in bronze censers, the feel of worn tatami under my bare feet. I knew very little of the world beyond those walls, only what I overheard from merchants and samurai who stopped to pray or rest. I had heard of Nobunaga, of course. Everyone had. They called him the Demon King, the destroyer of temples, the man who burned Enryakuji and slaughtered its monks when they defied him. Some whispered he was possessed by demons, others that he was a god of war reborn. Our head monk, old Abbot Kenyo, would not speak his name aloud, only made the sign against evil when messengers came bearing Odamon. Yet Honno-ji had connections to the Oda clan through old alliances, so we could not refuse when word came that Lord Nobunaga himself would lodge with us. He arrived on the 29th day of the 5th month with barely 100 attendants, an astonishingly small retinue for a daimyo of his power. I remember watching from the kitchen courtyard as his procession entered through the main gate. Tall samurai in lacquered armor, horses snorting and stamping in the drizzle, banners bearing the Oda crest hanging limp and wet. Nobunaga himself rode at the center, and I glimpsed him only briefly, a man neither young nor old, his face hard as temple stone, eyes that seemed to see through walls and flesh to the marrow beneath. He dismounted with fluid grace despite his armor, and his voice when he spoke carried the weight of absolute command. "Stable the horses. Prepare quarters. We wait here for news from Takamatsu." His retainers moved with practiced efficiency, and we temple servants scattered like sparrows before a hawk. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of anxious labor. We swept constantly, prepared meals of rice and pickled vegetables and fresh fish brought from the markets, changed bedding in the guest quarters, where samurai slept with swords within arm's reach. Lord Nobunaga took the western hall overlooking the inner garden, the finest rooms we had, with painted screens depicting cranes and pine trees. I saw him sometimes in passing, practicing calligraphy at a low desk, conferring with messengers who arrived mud-spattered from distant provinces. He stood on the veranda gazing at rain-soaked moss while Mori Ranmaru, his beautiful young attendant, hovered nearby. There was a strange tension in the air those days, like the pressure before a thunderstorm breaks. The samurai seemed restless, their laughter too loud, their gambling games in the evening too reckless. I heard fragments of conversation I did not fully understand. Talk of Hideyoshi besieging some castle in the west, of Tokugawa Ieyasu visiting somewhere, of troop movements and supply lines. Once I heard two Ashigaru whispering about a general named Akechi Mitsuhide, how he had been ordered to march and support Hideyoshi's campaign. The Bellflower general, one said. Cold man. Brilliant, but cold. Nobunaga kicked him once, the other replied, during a horse inspection, humiliated him before the whole army. Dangerous thing, to humiliate a proud man. They noticed me listening and fell silent, and I hurried away with my bucket and rags, heart beating fast, though I did not know why. The 20th day of the 6th month was oppressively humid, the air thick as wet wool. Rain fell steadily, drumming on tile roofs, turning the temple grounds to mud. I worked late that evening, helping prepare a meal for Lord Nobunaga and his inner circle, grilled fish, miso soup, rice so white it seemed to glow in the lamplight. Through the shoji screens I heard laughter, the clink of sake cups, Nobunaga's voice telling some story about a siege. For a moment, he sounded almost human. Not the demon of legend, but simply a warrior among his men. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the lamps extinguished, I lay on my thin futon in the servants' quarters near the eastern wall, listening to rain patter and the distant sound of a night guard's footsteps. Sleep came slowly. I dreamed of fire, of the burning monks at Enryakuji, whom I had never seen but heard described in horrified whispers. In my dream, they reached for me with blackened hands, their mouths open in silent screams. I woke to darkness and the sound of marching. At first, I thought it was still the dream, but then I heard it clearly. Feet, hundreds of feet, squelching through mud beyond the temple walls. Voices calling out in low tones, the jingle of armor and weapons, the creak of wood and iron. My heart began to race. I sat up, listening. Around me the other servants stirred, whispering anxiously, "What is that?" Soldiers, many soldiers, but why? Who? Then, cutting through the rain and darkness, a conch shell blew, a deep, mournful note that echoed off stone walls. Another answered it, and another, until the sound surrounded us completely. A voice shouted from somewhere outside, words I could not make out, and then a musket cracked, impossibly loud, and someone screamed. Chaos erupted. Men shouting, running footsteps, the clash of steel on steel, more gunfire splitting the pre-dawn air. I stumbled to the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. In the grey half-light before sunrise, I saw them. Soldiers, everywhere. Thousands of soldiers, encircling the temple like a noose drawing tight. They wore armor marked with the Bellflower mon of Akechi Mitsuhide. Akechi. The name hit me like a fist. The general who was supposed to be marching west to support Hideyoshi, he was here, in Kyoto, surrounding Honno-ji with an army. Betrayal. This was betrayal. The attack began in earnest, as dawn broke pale and wet. Akechi's troops poured through the outer gates, overwhelming the handful of Oda guards stationed there. I heard screaming, the wet sound of blades cutting flesh, the desperate shouts of men trying to rally a defense that could not hold. The smell of gunpowder drifted through the rain, acrid and sulphurous, mixed with the iron tang of blood. Someone grabbed my arm, one of the senior servants, his face white with terror. "Hide," he hissed. "Get to the cellars. Hide now." But I could not move. I stood frozen, watching through that window as the world came apart. Nobunaga's retainers fought desperately in the courtyard, their swords flashing in the rain, but they were so few, so pitifully few against thousands. An Ashigaru took a spear through the chest and fell backward into a puddle, his blood spreading like spilled wine. Another fired a musket point blank into an Akechi soldier's face, then died as 3 spears pierced him at once. It was slaughter, not battle. Then I saw Lord Nobunaga himself. He appeared on the veranda of the Western Hall, still in his sleeping robe, but with a bow in his hands, a quiver of arrows at his hip. His face was utterly calm, almost serene, as if he faced nothing more troubling than morning practice. He knocked an arrow, drew, and loosed in one smooth motion. An Akechi samurai fell from the courtyard wall, the arrow through his throat. Nobunaga drew again, fired again, each shot precise and lethal. For a moment, the attack seemed to falter, soldiers hesitating before this legendary archer who killed with such terrible ease. But then the muskets spoke. A volley cracked from the eastern wall, lead balls whining through the air, splintering the wooden veranda posts. Nobunaga staggered, dropping his bow, his left shoulder suddenly dark with blood. He clutched the wound, and I saw his face twist, not with pain, but with fury, with the rage of a man who understands he has been trapped, betrayed, undone by one of his own. Mori Ranmaru appeared beside him, beautiful Ranmaru with his sword drawn, shouting something I could not hear over the chaos. Other retainers rushed to form a barrier of bodies between their lord and the enemy. I saw a massive figure among them, Yasuke, the African samurai, his dark skin stark against the rain, wielding a katana with devastating skill, cutting down Akechi soldiers like wheat before a scythe. But it was hopeless. Everyone could see it was hopeless. Nobunaga retreated into the hall, Ranmaru and a handful of others with him. The Akechi forces surged forward, pouring through the breached gates, flooding the courtyard. The remaining Oda defenders died where they stood, loyal to the last breath. I watched an old samurai, his armor dented and bloodied, take 3 men with him before he fell. I watched a young Ashigaru, no older than me, crawl toward the well with his guts spilling from a spear wound, crying for his mother. The rain washed his blood away almost as fast as it flowed. Someone was screaming at me to move, to run, but my legs would not obey. Then the western hall erupted in flames. Orange fire bloomed behind the shoji screens, spreading with horrifying speed across the oil-soaked wood. The blaze roared up into the rain, defiant, fierce, consuming everything it touched. Nobunaga had set it himself. I knew this without being told. Better to die by his own hand than be taken prisoner. Better to burn than face the dishonor of capture. The heat reached me even from across the courtyard, searing my face, stealing the air from my lungs. That broke my paralysis. I turned and ran, stumbling through corridors thick with smoke, past servants fleeing in all directions, past abandoned sandals and spilled rice, and a child's toy dropped in panic. The temple was dying, its wooden bones crackling as fire spread from building to building. Somewhere ahead I heard women screaming, Lord Nobunaga's female attendants, trapped or fleeing, I could not tell. An older servant, a woman named Onatsu, who had always been kind to me, grabbed my sleeve. "The side gate," she gasped, her eyes streaming from smoke. "Help me get the ladies out through the side gate." We ran together through the chaos, gathering what women we could find. Court ladies in silk robes now smudged with ash, maidservants clutching each other in terror, a young concubine who sobbed and could barely walk. The side gate was choked with people trying to escape, but the Akechi soldiers there seemed less interested in slaughter than in securing the perimeter. They let the women pass, though one grabbed at a lady's sleeve and she screamed until Onatsu struck him with a fire poker and we dragged her through. Outside the walls, the world was pandemonium. Kyoto residents had poured into the streets to watch the temple burn, to loot abandoned buildings, to spread wild rumors about what was happening. Nobunaga is dead. Akechi has declared himself shogun. The Oda clan is finished. I guided the women through the crowd, my ears ringing, my lungs burning from smoke, until we reached a merchant's house where they might find shelter. Then I turned back, though every instinct screamed at me to keep running, to put as much distance as possible between myself and that inferno. But I could not leave. Not yet. Something drew me back to witness the end. I circled around to the northern wall, where fewer soldiers stood guard, and found a place where I could see the western hall. It was fully engulfed now, flames reaching 20 feet into the grey sky, sparks whirling upward like demon fireflies. The heat was immense, a physical force that pressed against my skin even from 50 paces away. Through the smoke and fire, I thought I saw figures moving inside, shadows against the inferno. I heard voices, though I could not make out words, only the cadence of final prayers or farewells. Then a scream, high and agonized, cut short. Whether it was Ranmaru or another retainer, I will never know. The roof collapsed with a roar, sending up a column of sparks and ash. Timbers crashed down, walls folded inward, and the fire seemed to intensify, as if fed by something more than wood and cloth. I stood there, a foolish boy in a soaked hemp robe, watching the Demon King's pyre burn, and I thought about the monks at Enryaku-ji, about karma and retribution, about the wheel of suffering that turns and grinds all pride to dust. The rain fell harder, hissing where it struck hot stone, but it could not quench those flames. Nothing could. I do not know how long I stood there, minutes perhaps or hours. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, an Akechi officer noticed me and shouted, waving his spear, "You, boy, clear out or we'll cut you down." I ran then, finally, my legs carrying me through muddy streets and narrow alleys, past shocked faces and burning buildings, for the fire had spread to neighboring structures, until my lungs gave out and I collapsed in a doorway, retching and shaking. Behind me, a column of smoke rose into the morning sky, visible across all Kyoto. The temple of Honno-ji was gone, consumed utterly, and somewhere in those ashes lay the body of Oda Nobunaga, the man who had nearly unified Japan, killed by treachery and flame on a rainy June morning. I huddled in that doorway as the city woke to the reality of what had happened. Merchants shuttered their shops, families barricaded doors, samurai loyal to various factions eyed each other warily in the streets. Kyoto, always a city of intrigue and violence beneath its cultured surface, held its breath and waited to see what would come next. I was still too stunned to think clearly, my mind replaying the attack over and over. The musket fire, the screaming, Nobunaga's bloodied shoulder, the flames. My robes were soaked through, my hands trembling, my bare feet cut and bleeding from running over broken tile. An old woman peered out from the house behind me, her face seamed with wrinkles, her eyes sharp despite her age. "You were at Honno-ji," she said. It was not a question. I could only nod. She pulled me inside without another word, sat me by her fire pit, pressed a cup of hot tea into my shaking hands. I drank, tasting nothing, feeling the warmth spread through my chest without truly registering it. "Tell me what you saw," she said quietly. So I told her, haltingly, about the encirclement and the attack, about Lord Nobunaga on the veranda with his bow, about the fire. She listened without interrupting, her face grave, and when I finished she was silent for a long moment. "Akechi Mitsuhide," she finally said, as if tasting the name. "They say he was the most loyal of Nobunaga's generals, the most trusted. And now this. Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would he do it?" She shook her head. Who can say what drives men to such deeds? Ambition, perhaps, or revenge for some slight, real or imagined. I heard once that Nobunaga humiliated him publicly, struck him during a ceremony, but maybe that is just rumor. Maybe he simply saw an opportunity. The great lord isolated with few guards, his armies scattered across the provinces fighting distant wars. A chance to seize power that might never come again. But Lord Nobunaga was his master, I said. His lord. How could he? "Betrayal is the way of the world," the old woman said not unkindly. "The Buddha teaches that all things are impermanent, boy. Power, loyalty, life itself. The Demon King burned temples and slaughtered monks, and now he burns. The wheel turns." I wanted to argue, to say that treachery was different from the fortunes of war, but I was too exhausted, too overwhelmed. Instead, I sat by her fire and stared into the flames, seeing again the Western Hall collapsing, hearing again those terrible screams. The hours passed in a blur. Rumors spread through Kyoto like wildfire. Nobunaga was dead, his body unrecovered. Akechi had declared himself a supporter of the Ashikaga shogunate, claiming to have acted to restore proper order. Nobunaga's eldest son, Nobutada, was trapped at Nijo Palace and fighting desperately. Tokugawa Ieyasu had fled toward his home province. The Oda generals were in chaos, unsure whether to submit or resist. Some whispered that Akechi had allies, that this was part of a broader conspiracy. Others said he had acted alone, a mad gamble that might yet fail. I learned later, much later, that Akechi had indeed marched his 13,000 troops overnight from his domain, telling his men they were going to support Hideyoshi's siege at Takamatsu Castle in the west. Only when they reached the Katsura River, just outside Kyoto, did he reveal the truth. The enemy awaits at Honno-ji. His soldiers, shocked but obedient, had followed him into treason. The attack had been meticulously planned, the encirclement timed for dawn when resistance would be minimal, the overwhelming force ensuring quick victory. Nobunaga, confident in his power and secure deep in his own territory, had never suspected. Neither had anyone else. By midday, I had recovered enough strength to venture back into the streets. The old woman tried to stop me, but I needed to see, needed to know. I made my way toward the still smoking ruins of Honno-ji, joined by a growing crowd of the curious and the horrified. Akechi's soldiers had cordoned off the area, keeping looters and onlookers at a distance, but from the edges I could see the devastation. Nothing remained but blackened stone foundations and collapsed walls. The beautiful halls where I had swept floors and tended lamps were gone, reduced to ash and charred timber. The garden where Lord Nobunaga had stood watching the rain was a scorched wasteland. The air still reeked of smoke and something else, the sickly sweet smell of burned flesh, human and animal both. Bodies lay in the ruins, charred beyond recognition, impossible to identify. Somewhere among them was Nobunaga, or so everyone assumed. But which corpse was his? No one could say. Some claimed he had committed seppuku in the traditional manner, cutting his belly and having a retainer strike off his head to prevent capture and display. Others said he had simply burned, trapped by flames too fierce to escape. The truth was lost in smoke and fire, as intangible as the rain that still fell softly over the ruins. I heard an Akechi officer telling his men to search the ashes carefully, to find the body and bring proof of death. But the fire had burned too hot, too completely. Days later they would still be sifting through debris, finding only fragments, pieces of armor, melted sword fittings, bones that could have belonged to anyone. I thought about Mori Ranmaru, that beautiful youth who had served Nobunaga with such devotion. Dead now, certainly, his body somewhere in that ash. I thought about Yasuke, the African warrior I had seen fighting with such ferocity. Had he died too, or been captured? I would learn later that Akechi's forces had spared him, considering a foreigner beneath the honor of execution, and released him to the Jesuits. But in that moment, I knew nothing except loss and ruin. Near the gate, I saw something that made my heart clench. A child's wooden sword, dropped by some samurai's son who had been staying at the temple. It lay in the mud, rain-soaked and forgotten. Without thinking, I picked it up, tucked it into my robe. A foolish gesture, meaningless, but I needed something, some small piece of what had been. A commotion drew my attention. Akechi Mitsuhide himself had arrived, riding through the ruined gates with a contingent of mounted samurai. I had never seen him before, and I stared openly from my place in the crowd. He was perhaps 40 years old, his face lean and intelligent, his bearing that of a man born to command. He wore fine armor chased with gold, the Bellflower mon prominent on his chest plate, and his eyes swept over the ruins with an expression I could not read. Triumph? Regret? Satisfaction? It was impossible to say. He dismounted and walked through the ash, his boots crunching on charred wood, and surveyed what he had wrought. An officer approached, bowing deeply. "My lord, we have searched thoroughly, but the body—" "Keep searching," Mitsuhide interrupted, his voice cold and measured. "I want proof. I want his head, or at least confirmation that he is dead. Until then, we cannot be certain." "Yes, my lord." Mitsuhide stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to his horse. As he passed near where I stood, with the other onlookers, his gaze swept over us. Peasants, merchants, temple servants, all insignificant in the vast game of power. His eyes met mine for the briefest instant, and I felt a chill run through me. Those were not the eyes of a madman or a demon. They were the eyes of a man who had calculated every risk, weighed every consequence, and acted with full awareness of what he did. Whether he would triumph or fall, he had chosen this path deliberately. Then he was gone, riding back into the city to consolidate his sudden, bloody power. The rain continued through the afternoon. I wandered the streets aimlessly, not knowing where to go or what to do. The temple that had been my home was destroyed. The monks and servants scattered or dead. I had no family to return to, no trade but prayer and sweeping floors. I was adrift in a city seething with tension and fear. Everywhere I went, I heard people speaking in hushed, anxious tones. What would happen now? Would the Oda generals accept Mitsuhide's coup? Would there be civil war? Some claimed Hideyoshi would avenge his lord. He was besieging Takamatsu Castle in the west, leading a large army. But how could he know what had happened? It would take days for news to reach him, and by then Mitsuhide would have secured Kyoto, claimed legitimacy, perhaps even rallied other daimyo to his cause. Others said Tokugawa Ieyasu, Nobunaga's ally, would come from the east with his forces. But Ieyasu was cautious, a man who calculated odds and never gambled recklessly. Would he risk everything for a dead lord? The uncertainty was almost worse than the violence itself. At least during the attack, there had been a terrible clarity, fire and blood and death. Now there was only rumor and speculation and waiting. As evening approached, I found myself near Nijo Palace, another of Nobunaga's residences in Kyoto. A crowd had gathered here too, and I heard that Oda Nobutada, Nobunaga's eldest son and heir, had been there when the attack began. He had tried to organize resistance, to avenge his father, but Akechi's forces had surrounded the palace as well. Now, Nobutada was trapped inside with a few hundred retainers, besieged just as his father had been. I pushed through the crowd until I could see the palace walls. Smoke rose from within, not the conflagration that had consumed Honno-ji, but the smoke of battle, of buildings burning piecemeal as fighting raged. I heard musket fire, the clash of swords, men shouting battle cries and death screams. Akechi's troops had sealed every exit, and the Oda forces inside were doomed. As darkness fell, the resistance began to crumble. The musket fire became sporadic, then ceased altogether. An eerie silence descended, broken only by the crackle of flames and the occasional shout. Then, from within the palace, I heard a voice raised in ritual chanting. The Nembutsu, the prayer to Amida Buddha. Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu. Nobutada was preparing for death. The formality of it struck me. Here was a young man, barely older than me, facing the end with the composure expected of a samurai. He would commit seppuku rather than be captured, would die as his father had died, and the Oda succession would die with him. I stood there listening to that chant, feeling tears stream down my face, though whether I wept for Nobutada or Nobunaga, or the sheer waste of it all, I could not say. The prayer continued for a time, then stopped abruptly. Silence. Then a great shout went up from Akechi's troops. Triumph, relief, the end of uncertainty. Nobutada was dead. The palace was taken. The Oda line, for all practical purposes, was broken. I fled then, unable to bear any more. I ran through the dark streets until I reached the river, the Kamo River that flows through Kyoto's heart, and I collapsed on its bank. The rain had stopped at last, and stars were breaking through the clouds, cold and distant, and utterly indifferent to the dramas of men. I pulled out the wooden sword I had picked up, held it in my trembling hands, and wondered what it all meant. The Buddha taught that attachment leads to suffering, that all earthly power is illusion, that birth and death are parts of an endless cycle. Nobunaga had seized power through violence, had burned temples and killed monks, had ruled with iron will and terrible ambition. Now he was dead, burned in the very kind of fire he had used to destroy others. Was that karma, justice, or simply the nature of the world, where the strong devour each other until the wheel turns and they become the devoured? I did not know. I was just a temple servant, a boy who swept floors and knew nothing of philosophy or strategy. But I had seen the Demon King die, had watched an empire shake and crack, and I would carry that knowledge the rest of my life. Days passed in continued chaos. Mitsuhide declared himself the protector of the Ashikaga shogunate, claimed he had acted to restore proper order against Nobunaga's tyranny. Some minor daimyo pledged support, others remained neutral, weighing their options. But the great generals, Hideyoshi, Ieyasu, Shibata Katsuye, did not accept the new order. They began to move, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. News reached Kyoto that Hideyoshi had heard of Nobunaga's death only days after it happened. He was 200 miles away at Takamatsu, besieging the Mori clan's castle. But within hours of receiving the news, he had made peace with the Mori, a shockingly quick negotiation that some would later call suspiciously convenient. He ordered his army to turn around and march back to Kyoto at forced pace. 200 miles in under a week, an almost impossible speed. His soldiers called it the Great Return, the Chugoku Ogaeshi, and it would become legendary. Mitsuhide, hearing that Hideyoshi was coming, scrambled to prepare defenses and rally more troops. But loyalty proved fickle. The men who had followed him in betraying Nobunaga now hesitated to face Hideyoshi's veteran army. Allies melted away. The 13 days of Mitsuhide's rule, brief as a mayfly's life, fragile as morning frost, were running out. I remained in Kyoto through those 13 days, sheltering with the old woman who had taken me in, doing odd jobs for merchants to earn rice and a place to sleep. The city buzzed with tension, with the certainty that violence was coming again, that the account opened at Honno-ji would soon be settled in blood. On the second day of the 7th month, just 13 days after the attack, the armies met at Yamazaki, a plain southwest of Kyoto, where the Yodo River flows broad and slow. I did not witness the battle myself. I had seen enough of war, but the city emptied as people rushed to watch or fled in fear, and by evening the outcome was clear. Hideyoshi had crushed Mitsuhide's forces utterly, scattering them like chaff before a storm wind. The Bellflower general fled the battlefield with a handful of retainers, trying to reach his stronghold at Sakamoto Castle, but he never made it. Somewhere in the countryside, peasants or masterless ronin, the stories varied, fell upon his small group and killed them for their armor and weapons. Akechi Mitsuhide, who had dreamed of replacing the Demon King, died in the mud, cut down by common men who did not even know his name. His head was brought to Hideyoshi, who displayed it at the ruins of Honno-ji as proof that vengeance had been served. I went to see it, drawn by morbid curiosity, or perhaps by some need for closure. The head sat on a wooden stand, eyes closed, face composed almost peacefully in death. The same man I had seen surveying the burning temple, calculating and cold. Now just meat and bone, rotting in the summer heat. Someone had placed incense sticks around the stand, and the smoke curled upward, sweet and cloying. An officer stood guard, keeping the crowd at a respectful distance. "The traitor's fate," he announced loudly. "Let all who would betray their lords look upon this and despair." But I felt no satisfaction, no sense that justice had been done. Only weariness. Only the conviction that the wheel of violence would keep turning, that today's avenger would be tomorrow's victim, that power, won through blood, would be lost the same way. Hideyoshi had avenged Nobunaga, but in doing so, he had also cleared his own path to supremacy. Within years, he would complete the unification Nobunaga had begun, would rule Japan as its supreme authority, would style himself imperial regent and build golden palaces. The irony did not escape me. Nobunaga's death had created the very power vacuum that allowed his retainer to rise. Perhaps Mitsuhide had been right to see opportunity in that rainy morning at Honno-ji. He had simply failed to see that others, smarter and faster, would seize it instead. The ruins of Honno-ji remained for months, a blackened scar in the heart of Kyoto. Eventually they were cleared, the site rebuilt, a new temple raised from the ashes. But it was never quite the same. The old temple had been destroyed, and with it something else. The certainty that power could be maintained through force alone, that genius and will could overcome any obstacle. Nobunaga had been called invincible, a force of nature, a demon or a god, depending on who spoke. And yet he had died so easily, so suddenly, betrayed by one of his own men in a temple surrounded by his enemies. If he could fall, anyone could. The lesson was not lost on those who came after. Hideyoshi ruled through alliances and careful diplomacy as much as through military might. Tokugawa Ieyasu, who eventually succeeded Hideyoshi and founded the shogunate that would last 250 years, was even more cautious. building a system designed to prevent betrayal through elaborate checks and balances. They had learned from Nobunaga's death what he had never fully grasped in life, that power unsecured by loyalty is no power at all, and trust is the most dangerous gamble any man can make. I left Kyoto eventually, drifting east toward Edo, earning my keep as a scribe and copyist. The wooden sword I had picked up at Honno-ji went with me, wrapped in cloth, a memento of the day the world changed. Sometimes people asked me about it, and I would tell them the story, how I had been at Honno-ji, how I had seen the Demon King's last stand, how the temple had burned and an age had ended in fire and blood. Some believed me. Others thought I was lying or exaggerating or mad. It did not matter. I knew the truth of what I had witnessed, and that was enough. Years passed. Decades. The world continued its turning. Hideyoshi died, his grand ambitions crumbling almost as soon as he was gone. Ieyasu took power and imposed order with an iron hand disguised in silk gloves. Japan entered a long peace, the Pax Tokugawa, and the age of constant warfare receded into memory and legend. I grew old, my back bent, my hands gnarled, my eyes dim. The boy who had swept temple floors became a man, then an elder, then finally this, a husk of fading recollection, kept alive only by the stories I carry. But I remember the rain falling on Kyoto that June morning, the musket fire splitting the dawn, the smell of gunpowder and blood and burning wood. I remember Nobunaga on the veranda with his bow, wounded but unbowed, fury and comprehension warring in his eyes. I remember the flames, orange and terrible, consuming the western hall and everyone in it. I remember Mori Ranmaru's scream, cut short. I remember the heat on my face, the ash in my throat, the sense that I was watching the end of something immense and terrible and magnificent. They call him the first unifier now, the man who began the process that Hideyoshi and Ieyasu completed. They write histories of his campaigns, his innovations, his ruthlessness and vision. They debate his legacy, whether he was a hero or a monster, a builder or a destroyer. But I do not think of him that way. I think of a man waking to chaos, reaching for a weapon, fighting with the skill of a lifetime, even as he understood he was doomed. I think of a man choosing fire over capture, death over dishonor. I think of a human being, flawed and brilliant and mortal, burned to ash by the very violence he had wielded so expertly. In my dreams, I am still at Honno-ji. The rain falls endlessly, drumming on tile roofs, and the smoke rises into grey skies. And somewhere in the burning halls, a voice chants the Nembutsu one final time. I wake with tears on my face, not of sorrow exactly, but of something else. Recognition, perhaps, of the fragility of all things, of the truth the Buddha taught, and the truth that morning proved. All is impermanent. All is suffering. All is ultimately empty of inherent existence. Even the Demon King. Even power itself. The wooden sword sits beside me now, as I prepare to die myself. My own fire is guttering, the fuel nearly spent. Soon, I will join the countless others who witnessed that morning. Nobunaga and Mitsuhide, Ranmaru and Yasuke, the soldiers and servants and all the forgotten dead whose names no one remembers. The wheel will turn, and I will be reborn or extinguished, and it will not matter which because both are the same in the end. But before I go, I wanted to speak this truth, to set down in words what I saw and felt and understood. I was there. I, Jirō, a nobody, a temple servant who swept floors and carried water and meant nothing to anyone. I saw history happen, saw the moment when one age ended and another began, saw a king die in flames and a throne stand empty and men scramble to seize what had been lost. I bore witness. That is all any of us can do. Bear witness to the moments we are given, the terrible and beautiful moments that comprise a life. I cannot say if what happened at Honno-ji was just or unjust, fated or random, the will of heaven or the chaos of earth. I know only that it happened, that I was there, and that the memory has shaped every day since. When I close my eyes, I see it still. The rain, the fire, the falling ash. I hear the muskets crack and the men scream and the timbers crash. I smell smoke and blood and incense burning, and I am 15 again, terrified and awestruck, watching as the man they called the Demon King met his end, not on some glorious battlefield surrounded by armies, but in a temple courtyard on a rainy morning, betrayed by one he trusted, consumed by flames he himself lit. There is a lesson in that, I think, though I am too old and tired to articulate it fully. Something about pride and power, about the danger of rising too high and trusting too much. Something about impermanence and the inevitable turning of the wheel. Something about how the mighty fall and the small endure, how history is made by great men but remembered by insignificant ones, how the truth of any moment belongs not to those who shape it, but to those who witness it and survive to tell. I was at Honno-ji. I saw the Demon King die, and now, 40 years later, as my own death approaches, I give this testimony to whoever will listen. Remember this: power is smoke, and smoke dissipates. Only the ash remains, and the rain that falls endlessly, washing everything clean. The fire burns low, the voice falls silent. Rest now, the history remains.